Without further ado, we're going to get going. And I am going to ask Anna, as a starting point, we're going to do a little intro. How did you get into podcasting, and what was the first podcast you listened to?
Perfect. So the first podcast that I listened to was Radiolab, and I definitely had one of those, drive time moments where I couldn't leave my car because I was just enthralled by the show. And that really sparked a huge interest in me. I started as an intern at WNYC, which produces Radiolab, about 15 years ago, and I really worked my way up from there. I then moved to another public radio organization in San Francisco, California, KQED. Was there for a couple of years, then headed to tech, to TuneIn, where I oversaw global content partnerships across the board. Then I went into a company named Himalaya, the largest radio podcast company in China, and brought in, incorporated a company and built out a team. And then since then, I've been at Amazon Music, where I oversee North America, LATAM, and Spain. So that's me.
Woo! And Sangeeta, how are you? Because I know you don't come from podcast. You're like me. You didn't come from podcast industry background. So tell us briefly about yourself and who you are and what you do.
So I'm a fake podcaster. I'm not from the podcasting industry. I don't know anybody in audio. And I started Sutras, which is a platform for South Asian women. And I was looking for a way to reach a lot of South Asian women. And I kind of stumbled across podcasting, entered a competition with Spotify Sound Up, where they were trying to find more women of color podcasters. Entered, won, put my podcast together, launched, and taught myself, basically, where do you upload, how do you market, what do you do with it, how do you reach an audience, all of that. So Masala podcast launched in 2019. And it's been 5 years. I've won 6 British Podcast Awards. I've been on giant billboards in New York and London. And it's been an amazing journey. And for me and for the women in my community, where we don't really have a voice, we certainly don't have a voice in media, in Western media. Even in spaces like this, if you look around, there aren't many of us. So I think for me, podcasting has been an amazing, amazing tool to reach the audience, to talk about our experiences. So that's my journey.
Amazing. Sangeeta's someone I've known since I got started in podcasting. We started around the same time. I'm also not from a podcasting background, so it's been amazing to get to know her and be supported by her amongst other women here. And Lizzie, I have met just recently, because she is joining us from the States, like Anna. Lizzie comes from Lemonada Media. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and talking about getting word out there. Lizzie works in marketing, and she knows about how to make people listen to your show.
Yes. So I've taken a little bit of a winding road to get to the podcast world, but I did start my career in media, but in the newspaper industry. So I was a journalist working in print newspapers, and quickly found that newspaper world was changing so fast, I might want a backup career in my pocket. So I actually ended up leaving the newspaper world and going back to business school, getting my business degree and making the switch to marketing. And I worked in the consumer products world. I worked for General Mills doing marketing for food products, worked for Aveda in the beauty industry, and I just kept gravitating back to the media world. It was just my first love. So I ended up making my way to American Public Media and did marketing for their podcast portfolio as well as Marketplace, the broadcast industry there. And I really just fell in love with podcasts. So I made my way to Lemonada almost 3 years ago, lead the marketing team there, as Naomi said, and it's just been an amazing experience. My gateway podcast was Reply All. Mm-hmm. I had a boyfriend at the time, who I would go every Sunday morning. We would go get donuts and drive around and listen to podcasts. Dumped the boyfriend, but kept the podcast habit.
Amazing. It's such good. Well, definitely you've kept the right thing. I'm sure he was very nice.
Agreed.
But still.
My husband would agree with you.
Okay, so a lot of us here are creators who are maybe self-taught, maybe you're working on your own, maybe it's a side hustle, maybe you've come into podcasting relatively recently. Certainly in the time we've been all involved, podcasting went like this, and now there's a lot of discussion about the evolving podcast industry and leveling out, and what does it mean? What does the future look like? So I'm really interested as a starting point of where we think women and women creators sit within that, and how this all shakes out in time. Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Okay, cool, go.
So I was at Podcast Movement Evolutions in LA. It's a similar conference like this. And all the big stages were white middle-aged men talking about what they do. All the audience members were women, people of color. So clearly there's an imbalance, I think. And I looked into some stats before I came on here. So Edison released a report. So more women listen to podcasts per week than men. 45% of women listen to podcasts, yet only 30% create podcasts. So that tells you, right? And if you look at the top podcast lists in the US, in the UK, there's maybe a few of us. There's maybe 3 or 4 podcasts, and all the big podcasts are the men. So we have a problem, I think, within the industry. And what you talked about, Naomi, is evolving and all of the rest of it, which is all fine. But my fear is that it's just the kind of, what I say, the big boys club. They come in, they have a lot of money, and they kind of take over. And women, the kind of creators I've seen over the last 5 years that I've been a podcaster, are kind of moving out a little bit. So I think this is a good time for us as women podcasters in this industry to kind of really rally around, get together, and sort of see how we can support each other, what we can do to build all of us up, because we've got to do it together, right?
So on that point, because we were going to come on to this, but we might as well touch on it now. How do women support one another? Like, what can we do? Because I know you wanted to mention that. Like, things like this are really great, and this is one of the reasons that we want to allow time and opportunity for you to talk to each other as well. But any thoughts on that as well?
So I think so all revolutions need like us to come together. And I think of it as a revolution. So I think if there are ways where, first of all, we listen to other women's podcasts, we talk about it on social media. A lot of women that support me will come up to me in person and say, oh my God, I love that episode you did, but would not talk about it on either social media or whatever. We just don't seem to do that. But support other women podcasters. Talk about them on social media. Tell your friends about them. That's one way. And then I think together, collaboratively, we need to sort of gather. We need to meet each other. We need to have more meetups like this and talk about what we can do to support each other. So I think it's on 2 levels: individual, what we can all do, and the collective, I think.
Yeah, well, definitely this is not going to be the last time we're all going to be getting together. I think we can definitely say that. So, and Anna, how do you see that across different continents? Like, what's the situation amongst your remit? Like, you're covering a large geographic area. How do you see the situation in other areas of the world as well?
Yeah, it's quite varied. I think there's more similarities between Canada and the US, where a lot of the more established publishers, creator groups are charting prominently. Whereas in Latin America, a lot in Brazil, in Mexico, top-ranked podcasts, there's more churn there. So you find a lot of the indie creators breaking through, and they're kind of revolving. So it's a little bit more of user-generated quality content that's breaking through. And that kind of leads to more robust relationships and content development down the line. It's more of a nascent market there, so there's a lot of opportunity in LATAM. But needless to say, I think that there's also, in this new space, the avenue for entry of user-generated content within the US and Canada is really widening because of these moments, because of these conversations that are happening in these panels. So I would really encourage you all to, like was said, lean in, tap into, women groups and networks, and really try to advocate for each other as much as possible.
It's so interesting that you say that creators are leading in Brazil, Mexico. I wonder what we can learn from those sectors and countries to bring into widening the market in US, Canada, the UK, where we are here. Because actually, if creators are leading the way in other countries, it can be done, and I think, there's a bit of a cross, like a medium crossover where
content that's successful on socials and on YouTube and on video is there's kind of a smoother entry into podcasting. So just kind of being mindful of where your audience is. If you're already creating content in a separate medium, crossing over, making sure that you're being agile and keeping in touch with your audience, being as authentic as possible. So I think that's where the LATAM team and LATAM creators are really kind of being successful, is that there's a lot of crossover and just kind of continuity with the conversations that they're having across mediums with their audience base.
And Lizzie, I was going to ask you, Lemonada is a women-led company. For anyone who doesn't know, you should look them up. They do amazing work. But lots of people still aren't even listening to podcasts. So how do we demystify podcasts to increase the accessibility of them? And as creators, that's a way of increasing your audience, because if you're getting people to listen who don't listen to podcasts, that's a way of growing everybody's slice of the pie. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really great question. And I think one of the things that's so wonderful about podcasts that works so well for so many people, and particularly for women, is that it is one of the few media vehicles that works wherever you need it to and can fit very easily into your life while you're doing other things. And so as a marketer, I really try to take advantage of that and think about my consumer, my listener, and what she's doing and how a podcast can work with her. So while she's washing the dishes, while she's picking up the kids from school, podcast can go with her. It's very difficult to watch a TV show while you're picking up the kids from school or while you're washing the dishes, but it's very easy to take a podcast along. And then I think what we hear over and over and over is that podcasts really create community and intimacy in a way that very few other media vehicles can. There's something about that voice in your ear that really creates a relationship between you and the podcaster. And I think building that relationship with a female host that understands some of the things that you're going through, whether it's menopause or childcare. I mean, there's issues that are unique to female listeners, and serving that market, it's very important to us at Lemonada. One of the things that we hear constantly with Wiser Than Me, with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, is one of our shows. And when Julia came to us, she said, we wanted to elevate the voices of women that are not being heard, these older women over 70. And we hear from women constantly who are saying, I feel like I'm listening to my grandmother. I feel like I'm listening to my auntie when I listen to this show. And that kind of relationship that we're creating there has prompted them to go call their grandmother or their auntie or their mom. That's the kind of like relationship that we hope to build with every listener. It should feel like you're talking to a female relative or a friend or something like that. And so I think that with that in mind, it's just really about kind of creating that intimacy and how can it fit into her life really easily. That makes it feel so much less scary. And yeah, there's some technology to get over that's a little bit more difficult than picking up a magazine or picking up a book or flipping on the TV. But it's really not that difficult if you make it understandable to someone how it can fit into their lifestyle very easily. So I think that that's what we typically try to do. It's less about the how it works and more about the why it works for you. And once you can solve that problem in someone's life, they're definitely willing to go a little bit of an extra mile to make it accessible to them.
If I might add something, Naomi.
Sure.
Touching upon what you said. So a lot of Masala podcast listeners, because I'm talking about sex and periods and menopause, these are things, they're taboo topics. So the podcast is a safe space where they're listening on their AirPods. No one else can hear what they're hearing, right? And it's a feeling of safety. It's a feeling of community, a lot of the things you mentioned, right? And particularly in communities and cultures like mine, where these things are not discussed. And these things are problematic because if you get someone who doesn't have the space to talk about the menopause or mental health, that's a problem. And I think the bigger picture, I think what podcasting does is it literally changes the lives of women. I get women coming up to me saying, because of you, I feel less alone. Someone came up to me and said, I was in an abusive marriage and I kept listening to your podcast and one day I plucked up the courage to leave. So that's the power of podcasting. We're in their ears. We're building this intimate, safe relationship with them. So I think for us as creators, it's important to remember that.
Definitely. And I think as creators, when we come to events like this, a lot of what people are interested in is how can I get better? Like, how can I improve my skills? How can I grow my audience? How can I, God forbid, make money off my podcast? So what I was going to ask Anna about was, how do you suggest that creators can increase knowledge, contacts, et cetera, what can people from within the industry like you do to help people in our audience, for example?
We have a couple of different options at Amazon Music. So I oversee a group of dedicated support, representatives. They're standing by. We have dedicated inventory for indie creators. So we're constantly promoting creators of color, DEI. That's really inclusion and access is really important to me, especially because of my background. So please head to podcasters.amazon.com for more information. So that's a really great resource. But then we also partner with amazing companies like OSHA, like ASA, a women collective, and we offer free webinars, growth campaigns, really points of access to myself and my team. So it's more of a human touch point. We have Q&As. We share, we really connect, and more important for me also is I get to hear from creators from the ground, like what interests them, how can we help, how can we kind of connect the dots for you and grant you access to our services so that we can amplify your voices. So I think the in-house resources and the team that I kind of lead, but then also the partners from hosting providers to women collectives to kind of this panel and having access to this group is really important. So podcasters.amazon.com for more, and you can also find me after this.
That's cool. And just finally, before we go, you touched, Sangeeta, on your audience and the diaspora of women in your community. We were talking before about the power of, throwing my cards everywhere, the power of conversations beyond where you are in your own little community, and the power that podcasting has to be completely global. Do you want to just touch a little bit about the power of diaspora conversations and the width and breadth that podcasting can reach?
So there are 2.75 million South Asian women in this country. There are a similar amount in the US. So I think even though it's important to remember that some groups like South Asians or others may not be as visible, there are a lot of us. And these little conversations can become big conversations, can start massive changes, because changes start at an individual level. So I think it's important to remember that as creators, we might be sitting in our living room, pressing our Zoom recorder and creating a thing. But that's going to reach out to all of these millions of people. And it's not just we live in the West, but 25% of the world population is South Asian. That's my audience. Right? I haven't tapped into them, but I will.
There's a very big wide world out there, and there's so much community and collaboration just awaiting us, which we are about to get into. So as Sangeeta mentioned, when we were talking about the power of collaboration, this is what this event is about. So we are all available for you to come and chat to us now, but we would also really like you to meet each other. We are also just about to announce the shortlists for this year's International Women's Podcast Awards, which is what I look after. So that's going to be going live in just a second, and there's lots of people who've been involved with that previously who are here as well. But if you have questions, do feel free to come and see us. What we would really like is for you to meet some other people here and to spend some time chatting to people, because this is what women are so good at. And we would really love to see some collaborations and some conversations building from this point. We are going to be holding future events for women creator meetups as well. And we're going to be looking to really facilitate those. So if you have ideas, or if you have things that you would like to be hearing about, or things you would like to see covered, then do let us know. But I can see, maybe just stick your hand up if you are working in the sector and might be able to answer questions for people as well? Let's have a little show of hands. Oh my goodness. Okay, loads. Amazing. Right. And if you don't know the people who are sitting around you, maybe just say hi to them. Let's get some conversation started. And we are going to spend we've only got 10, 15 minutes before we're going to get kicked out of here. But we just really want to give you the opportunity to ask some questions. We're not going to do a Q&A from the floor because it will take too much time, but come find us, come chat to other people. And if you have anything else particularly that you want to speak to, this is what this time is for. So thank you very much for coming.